They say that betrayal is a knife to the heart, but I'd argue that it's worse than that. Betrayal is the slow burn of acid, eating you alive from the inside out, leaving you hollow and empty. And the thing about betrayal? It always starts when you least expect it, on a day so ordinary that you could swear nothing could ever go wrong. It was a Thursday when my world cracked in half. I'd just closed the biggest deal of my career, a contract that would secure our future, pay off the mortgage, and let us finally take that dream vacation to Italy. I remember grinning like an idiot as I stepped off the plane, already picturing the look of joy on my wife Jessica's face when I told her the news. She was my reason for everything. Every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice I'd made over the years was for her. Because I believed in us. I believed in our love, in the promises we'd made to each other. But when I pulled into our driveway, that faith took its first, tiny hit. Our neighbor Kyle was standing on his front porch, and he was staring at me. Not a friendly wave, not a casual welcome home, but a cold, unreadable stare that made something twist in my gut. I nodded at him, trying to shake off the unease. Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he was jealous that I was finally home, and he'd have to deal with Jessica's rejection. He'd always been a bit too friendly, a little too eager to linger when I wasn't around. The front door was unlocked when I walked in. The house felt off, too quiet, too still. "Jess," I called out, dropping my bag by the door. No answer. As I moved through the house, I saw little things, subtle changes. An unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air. The watch on the coffee table, one I'd never seen before. A wine glass on the counter, stained with lipstick. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel, and at the end of it, our bedroom door was cracked open. I took a breath and pushed it wider, feeling like I was stepping into a nightmare. There she was, my beautiful wife, her hair tangled, her skin flushed, sheets twisted around her bare shoulders. And sitting on the edge of our bed, shirtless, with a smug smirk on his face, was Kyle, my neighbor, my friend. "Hey man," he said casually, like we were at a backyard barbecue. "You're home early." It was the way he said it, the arrogance, the absolute lack of shame, that made me see red. But I didn't move, didn't speak. Because in that moment, I realized something. Kyle was nothing. He was a stepping stone, a catalyst for something darker. The real betrayal was the woman I'd given my life to. The woman who was now staring at me, eyes wide with shock, mouth frozen in a silent apology I'd never accept. "Get dressed," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Both of you. Or what?" Kyle laughed, leaning back like he owned the place. "You're gonna hit me?" I looked him in the eye, a deadly calm settling over me. "No, Kyle. I'm going to ruin you. Because revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had every intention of serving it straight from the freezer." The silence that followed my threat was absolute. Jessica's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and I could see the way her hands shook as she reached for her clothes. Kyle, on the other hand, didn't seem to get it, didn't seem to realize that his life had just changed forever. I stood there, unmoving, as he pulled his shirt on. The smugness was still in his eyes, a glimmer of arrogance that made me want to wipe it away with my fist. But I didn't, because a punch would be too simple, too quick. No, they needed to feel what I was feeling, every inch of pain and rage, every drop of humiliation. I waited until Kyle was fully dressed, until Jessica had pulled on the robe she kept behind the door. And then I stepped aside. "Get out," I told him, my voice flat and cold. "I never want to see you again." He hesitated, his eyes flickering to Jessica like he expected her to intervene, to say something. But she didn't. She just stared at the floor, silent and broken. Kyle shrugged, acting like he didn't care. But I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he pushed past me, the way his shoulders tensed as he walked down the hall and out the front door. I heard it close behind him, the sound echoing like a final goodbye. Jessica looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "It's not what you think." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "It's exactly what I think. But you're going to tell me anyway." She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the robe tighter around herself. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice thick with desperation. "I was lonely, and you were gone so much for work, and Kyle. He was just there. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Save it," I snapped. "You didn't mean for it to happen. You meant it every single time. Every touch, every kiss, every betrayal. You made a choice, Jessica, and now you're going to live with the consequences. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch between us, let her feel the weight of it pressing down like a vice. You'll find out soon enough, I said finally. But know this, you don't get to cry. You don't get to play the victim. You did this. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her shame. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Downstairs, I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. He picked up on the first ring. Elliot, I said, my voice as calm as a blade, I need you to start the paperwork. I'm divorcing Jessica, and I want everything. You got it, Elliot said. How ugly are we making this? As ugly as humanly possible. Understood. Anything else? I thought about it for a moment. Yes. I want you to look into Kyle. Everything about him, his finances, his job, his marriage. I want to know every dirty little secret he's hiding. Consider it done, Elliot replied. I'll be in touch. I hung up, my mind already racing with possibilities. They thought they'd gotten away with it, thought they could hurt me and walk away unscathed. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just going to destroy their relationship. I was going to destroy everything they'd built, everything they loved. Because betrayal demands retribution, and I had every intention of delivering it. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own home. The house was cold, haunted by the echoes of laughter and love that now felt like lies. Every memory was tainted, Jessica cooking dinner, us cuddling on the couch, late-night whispers in bed. Now, all I saw was the ghost of betrayal, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. Today was the first move in a game of chess that would end with her and Kyle losing everything. Jessica was still upstairs, locked in the bedroom. I didn't bother checking on her. Instead, I grabbed my car keys and left, driving straight to my best friend, Dave's, house. Dave was the kind of guy you'd want in your corner during a fight, loyal to the bone and willing to burn the world down for the people he loved. We'd known each other since college, and he was practically family. When he opened the door, he took one look at my face and frowned. What happened? Jessica cheated on me. With Kyle. The silence that followed was heavy. Dave's eyes darkened, and his fists clenched at his sides. That piece of trash, he growled. What do you want to do? Take them down, I said simply. Ruin their lives the way they ruined mine. A slow smile spread across Dave's face. Then let's get to work. We spent the next few hours mapping out a plan. I told Dave about the divorce papers I'd already set in motion and my lawyer's investigation into Kyle. But we needed more. I wanted to hit them where it hurt the most. What's the one thing Kyle cares about more than anything? Dave asked, leaning back with a thoughtful expression. His image, I said. He wants people to think he's a great guy, the friendly neighbor, the community leader. He's always putting on a show. Dave's smile was almost feral. Then we make sure everyone knows exactly who he really is. We started by collecting every bit of dirt we could find. Dave had connections with some local journalists, and he promised to leak Kyle's affair to the press. But that wasn't enough. I wanted something more personal, something that would tear him apart from the inside. Remember that little side business of his? Dave asked. The one he brags about at every barbecue? Yeah, the property development. Dave's grin widened. What if we expose him for cutting corners, breaking safety codes? We'll make it impossible for him to get any new contracts. I felt a cold thrill of satisfaction. Do it. By the time I got home, the wheels were already in motion. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. I walked into the house and found Jessica sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed with tears. Where did you go? She asked softly. To plan my future, I said. A future without you. Her lip trembled. Please, can we talk about this? I leaned in, my voice ice cold. Oh, we'll talk. But not here. I slid a piece of paper across the table. I want you out by the end of the week. Find somewhere else to stay. This house is mine now. She picked up the paper, her eyes widening. You're taking everything? You bet I am. You gave up your right to this life the moment you let him into our bed. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake. I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. What you did was a choice. A deliberate choice to betray me, and now you'll live with the consequences. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Only cold, unrelenting determination. By the time I'm done, I said, you and Kyle will have nothing. And when you look back on this, I want you to remember one thing. I gave you everything, and you threw it away for nothing. She didn't respond. She couldn't. And as I walked away, I knew that the game had only just begun. That night, I didn't go home. Home was a place that no longer existed for me. Instead, I crashed on Dave's couch, and together, we laid the groundwork for the destruction of Jessica and Kyle's lives. The next morning, my lawyer Elliot called. "You're going to like this," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've dug up some information on Kyle. It turns out he's been in serious debt for years. His property development business is barely holding on, and he's been using shady deals to stay afloat." A smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. Perfect. Leak it to the right people. Make sure the word gets around that he's a fraud. Already on it. By the way, the divorce papers have been served. Jessica's lawyer reached out. She's begging for mediation. Wants to settle things quietly. Tell her no. My voice was flat, cold. I want her to feel every ounce of pain she's caused me. I want this to be public, humiliating, and unforgettable. Understood, Elliot said. I'll keep you posted. I hung up and turned to Dave, who was scrolling through his phone with a wicked grin. I just posted an anonymous tip about Kyle's debt to the local news station, he said. By tonight, the whole town will know he's a con artist. I could almost feel the cracks forming in Kyle's perfect image. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That afternoon, I drove back to the house. Jessica was gone, just as I'd instructed, but she left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to heal. I crumpled the note without a second thought. Her apologies meant nothing to me. She'd made her bed, now she could lie in it. I spent the next hour methodically packing her things into garbage bags. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, everything she'd left behind. I didn't bother sorting or folding anything. I just shoved it all into bags and dragged them out to the curb like trash. A few neighbors watched from their porches, whispering behind their hands as I worked. I didn't care. Let them talk. I wanted them to know. When I was done, I stood back and looked at the pile of bags. It was a fitting metaphor for our marriage, something that had once been beautiful, now reduced to garbage. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Jessica a message. Your things are outside. Come get them before the garbage truck does. An hour later, I watched from the window as she pulled up in her car, her face pale and drawn as she got out and began collecting the bags. She moved slowly, her shoulders hunched, like she was carrying the weight of the world. But I felt no pity, because I knew what was coming next, and this was just the beginning. Dave called me later that night. You're going to love this, he said, barely containing his excitement. The news ran a story about Kyle's shady business dealings. Apparently, his investors are furious, and he's already losing contracts. The guy's going to be bankrupt in a matter of weeks. I felt a cold, satisfied thrill. Good. Let him lose everything. And one more thing, Dave added. I've been talking to some of the other neighbors. Turns out Kyle's been messing around with more than just Jessica. He's got a reputation for going after married women. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Perfect. Let's make sure everyone knows. I want him to be a pariah in this town. I want him to know what it feels like to be betrayed by everyone around him. Because that's what betrayal does. It tears you apart from the inside out, until there's nothing left but pain and emptiness. And now, I was going to make them both feel it. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, Kyle's name was the subject of every whispered conversation in the neighborhood. People looked at him differently now, with thinly veiled contempt, their eyes filled with judgment as he walked down the street. I watched from my porch one evening as he jogged past my house. His shoulders were tense, his expression anxious. He looked like a man on the verge of losing control. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction watching him squirm. Jessica, on the other hand, had disappeared. I hadn't seen her since she'd picked up her belongings from the curb. A small part of me wondered if she'd gone to stay with Kyle, but I knew that wasn't likely. She had nowhere else to go. Later that night, Dave called with more good news. Kyle's investors have officially pulled out, he said. He's drowning in debt, man. He's trying to sell his car, his house, everything he can to scrape together some cash. Good, I said coldly. Let him feel what it's like to lose everything. But I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted to make it personal. I wanted him to feel the same gut-wrenching agony that I'd felt when I walked into that bedroom. So I made another call to Elliot. I want you to set up a meeting with Kyle, I said. Tell him it's about helping him get out of this financial mess. Are you sure? Elliot asked, sounding wary. This could escalate quickly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. I arrived early, taking a seat in the corner of a quiet coffee shop. When Kyle walked in, I felt a cold rush of anger. He looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, his confidence shattered. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, sinking into the chair across from me. "I know we're not exactly on good terms, but I'm desperate, man. I could lose everything." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until he began to squirm. "You're already losing everything, Kyle. And you deserve it." His face tightened. "Look, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have gone near Jessica, but she was the one who came to me. She was lonely." "Shut up," I said, my voice ice cold. "You think you can justify this? You think you can make excuses for betraying me?" He leaned forward, his desperation palpable. "Please. I'll do anything to make this right." I almost laughed. The idea of him begging for mercy after everything he'd done was delicious. "You want to make it right?" I leaned in, my voice low and dangerous. "Then leave. Get out of town and don't ever come back." His eyes widened. "I can't just leave. My whole life is here." "Not anymore," I said. "Because if you stay, I'll make sure there's nothing left for you. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done." Kyle's jaw tightened, but he knew he was defeated. "Fine," he spat. "I'll leave. But I hope you know that Jessica still loves you. She regrets everything." I felt a surge of cold fury. "Jessica's dead to me. And soon, you will be too." He stood, his hand shaking, and walked out of the coffee shop without another word. I watched him go, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. That night, I got a text from Elliot. "Kyle's gone. Moved out. No forwarding address." But I wasn't done. Because there was still one person left who needed to pay. Jessica. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, staring into eyes that I barely recognized. I'd become someone else, someone driven by rage, consumed by a need for revenge. But I was far from done. Kyle was out of my life, but Jessica was still here. The person I trusted most in the world had stabbed me in the back, and I couldn't let that go unanswered. It was time to end this. I drove to the address where Elliot had tracked Jessica down, a rundown apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place where dreams came to die. I felt a cold thrill as I knocked on the door, knowing that this would be the final act. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. She looked like a shadow of the woman I'd once loved, a hollow, defeated, a ghost of herself. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice cold and detached. She stepped aside silently, and I walked into the cramped living room. Boxes were stacked against the wall, and a stained couch sat in the middle of the room. This was what she'd chosen. This was what she'd thrown our life away for. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, my expression blank. "I'm here to say goodbye." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing to you, but I'm so sorry. I lost everything, my home, my marriage, my dignity. I've paid for what I did." I shook my head. "Not yet." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the coffee table. "Open it." With trembling hands, Jessica picked up the envelope and pulled out the stack of photos. Her eyes widened as she looked through them, images of her and Kyle, their affair laid out in damning detail. "I know you've been fired from your job," I said. "I know you've been struggling to find work. But you might want to keep looking, because if you even think about trying to rebuild your reputation, those photos will make sure you never do." She looked up at me, her face pale. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve to feel the pain you caused me," I said coldly. "You took everything we built together and destroyed it for nothing. You betrayed me, and I won't let you walk away unscathed." Jessica's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. I leaned in close, my voice low. "You'll never rebuild your life. You'll never find happiness, and you'll always carry this weight on your shoulders. That's your punishment, Jessica." She covered her face with her hands, her body racked with sobs. "Please, just let me go." I stood up and turned to leave. "Goodbye, Jessica. This is the last time you'll ever see me." I walked out of the apartment, letting the door close behind me. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me. I'd won. I'd gotten my revenge. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was the hollow ache of what I'd lost. There was no going back. There was no rebuilding. The love I once had for Jessica was dead, and all that remained was the cold ashes of betrayal. And in the end, I realized that revenge hadn't set me free. It had only chained me to the pain, binding me to the past that I could never escape. As I walked away from Jessica's apartment, a strange numbness settled over me. I should have felt triumphant. I'd taken my revenge, ruined their lives as they'd ruined mine. But instead, I felt empty, hollow, like a man wandering through a fog with no end in sight. I drove back to Dave's house, parking out front and sitting in the car for a long moment. He opened the door before I even knocked, his eyes searching my face. "How did it go?" "It's done," I said. "Kyle's gone, and Jessica knows she's finished." Dave nodded slowly, but I saw the flicker of concern in his eyes. "So what now?" I didn't have an answer. "I don't know. I thought this would bring me peace, but I just feel lost." "You can't stay like this forever, man. You need to start rebuilding your life." I knew he was right, but the thought of moving forward seemed impossible. The person I'd been was gone, and I didn't know who I was anymore. For the next few weeks, I went through the motions. I went back to work, trying to focus on the job, trying to find meaning in the day-to-day routine. But nothing felt real. Everything was cold, mechanical. One evening, I was sitting alone in my house, an empty shell of a home that now felt more like a tomb, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jessica standing on the front porch, her face pale and drawn. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered. I needed to see you." I laughed, a harsh sound. "You've seen me. Now leave." "Please," she said, her voice desperate. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I can't live like this. I can't carry this weight alone." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see it. "That's not my problem. You made your choice, Jessica. Now live with it." I shut the door in her face, my heart pounding. A few days later, Dave invited me to a barbecue at his house. At first, I refused, but he insisted. "You need to get out of that house, man. You need to be around people who care about you." Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived, I felt out of place, surrounded by the warmth of laughter and conversation. But then I met her. Her name was Emily. She was a friend of Dave's wife, and from the moment we started talking, something in me shifted. She had a warmth in her eyes, a kindness that I hadn't seen in a long time. We talked for hours, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I grew closer. She helped me remember what it was like to feel something other than pain, to laugh, to enjoy life. She became a light in my darkness. But just as I started to believe that happiness was possible again, my past came knocking. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello. It's me." Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "I need your help." A cold knot formed in my chest. "Why would I ever help you?" "Because I'm in danger," she said, her voice breaking. "Kyle's back. He's been threatening me, saying I ruined his life, and he's going to make me pay. I'm scared, and I have nowhere else to turn." Every instinct told me to hang up, to let her face the consequences of her choices. But despite everything, I couldn't ignore the fear in her voice. "Where are you?" I asked. She gave me an address, and against my better judgment, I drove there. I found her huddled in a corner of a cheap motel room, her eyes red-rimmed with fear. "He was here," she whispered. "He said he'd be back tonight." I stood guard that night, watching the door as Jessica slept fitfully. When morning came, I made a decision. "You need to leave," I told her. "Start over somewhere else. Far away from here." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." It was the closest I would ever come to forgiveness. Months passed, and slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I sold the house, cutting ties with the painful memories that haunted every room. Emily and I grew closer, and I found a new place with her, somewhere we could create new memories, free from the shadows of the past. I never heard from Jessica again. I hoped she'd taken my advice and built a new life, far away from the wreckage we'd both created. One night, as Emily and I stood on the balcony, looking out over the city lights, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret what happened?" I shook my head. "No. It made me who I am. It showed me what I was capable of, for better or worse. But most of all, it led me to you." She smiled, her eyes full of warmth. "You deserve happiness, you know. You deserve to be free of that pain." And in that moment, I realized that I was. Because revenge had once been my driving force, but now I'd found something stronger. Something worth living for. Love. Real, honest, unwavering love. I took Emily's hand, holding it tight. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally home. The end.